Committee. They've been my eyes and ears about so much of the golf course, about the character of the golf course, the history of the golf course, and the membership as well. So today I'll talk to you a little bit more about myself, my upbringing, my education, my experience. We'll get into a little bit of the design outlook that I think my philosophies kind of pivot around. And then finally, we'll get into the fun part of the whole by whole master plan. So as you saw, I grew up on a golf course. My grandparents built that golf course in the 70s, and my mother ended up running the pro shop. And so every morning in the summer, we would be woken up at 5 o'clock so that we could be at the golf course for the first golfer and to let them in and sign them in. And then my mom would say, I don't want to see you kids for the rest of the day, and don't bother the golfers. So my brother and I were just kind of let loose in the golf course. And the members would come in on 9 and say, we saw Christina Bradley looking for balls in the woods on 4, or they're up in a tree on 16. So it was a really kind of unique and special upbringing for me. So golf really is kind of inside my whole experience of childhood, and I've always been around golf. It's my kind of safe space. So and golf does that for you. It's special that way, because once you know golf can take you all over the world, and you can kind of feel at home no matter where you are. So I did my undergraduate degree in Florida. I played Division I golf down there. Probably had a little too much fun, but that was a great foundation for me in stepping outside of Canada and looking into different types of golf courses. So we played in the mountains of Tennessee and the sand of North Carolina and the Bermuda grass of Florida. So it was just kind of eye-opening to me about how golf courses can have different characteristics and different personalities and different landscapes. After I graduated from Stetson, I wasn't good enough to keep playing golf, but I didn't want to leave the industry, so I had to decide what I wanted to do at that point. And golf course architecture had kind of always been in the back of my mind. I read a cool story in one of the golf magazines about how they turned gravel quarry mine into a US Open venue. And when I read that, I was like, wow, that's exactly what I want to do with the rest of my life. That was Chambers Bay. And so I decided to pursue a master's degree in landscape architecture from the University of Guelph, and put those two things together of competitive golf plus a master's in landscape architecture. And I got really lucky, and I met the right people and was able to get a job in golf course architecture pretty soon after I graduated. I was given a Stanley Thompson Society scholarship during my final year of my master's. Stanley Thompson is a very well-known Canadian golf architect. And they gave me a couple $1,000s to contribute to my thesis, to do data collection or whatever it may be. And so I took that money and I went to Scotland and I played golf, and I called it data collection. So that was pretty fantastic. And that was another one of those experiences that really changed the way that I thought about golf. One of those pilgrimages at the right time in my life to the Mecca of golf that really influenced me. And on that trip, I met my future employer and mentor, Martin Hawtrey, who was then acting as the R&A consultant. So I spent the next 5 years over in the UK having access to some of the most incredible golf courses in the world. We worked at Lahinch, Hoylake, Royal Birkdale, St. Andrews. So that was really special for me, and those 5 years were important in kind of learning more about golf, but about golf architecture. I moved back to Canada in 2019 after 5 years in living in Oxford. Opened up my own design firm, and then there was a pandemic, so that actually gave me time to kind of figure out where I fit into this golf world in Canada. Golf architecture is kind of a niche job and niche industry, so and there aren't too many women doing it. So there was some adjustment that had to happen there, and kind of how do I differentiate myself from the other architects and really find a place for myself in golf design. So this process has been going on for a year now, and I'd like to thank you all for making history by hiring the first women architect in Canada to do a redesign on a project like this. So thank you. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so I think it is important to just touch on acknowledging that you have an incredibly special golf course on your hand. It is exceptional. You have the things that you cannot create. For example, the land that you're on, the vista that you have these ingredients that make this golf course exceptionally special. But also why it is important to keep innovating and keep investing in the golf course. Attracting and retaining membership, that's sustainability in membership, that's a healthy membership. So reinvesting in a golf course will encourage someone to join here rather than join somewhere down the street. You are different players than you were from the last time this process happened in 2007, 2008. So you might be better golfers, you might have access to better equipment or better balls or better teaching. Or maybe not, maybe you're coming off an injury and your game is just different than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And we want the golf course to reflect that and be able to suit your needs as an evolving golfer. Extend the life of your membership. So we don't want the golf course to limit you from golfing as long as you want. So if we can, and one of the pushbacks of doing a big project like this is people will say, I only have 2 or 3 good golfing years left. I don't want to give them up for construction. And I would like you to think of it as, if we do this work, if we do this construction, you're going to have 10 or 15 years left of your golfing life. So really extending that life of the membership as long as possible. A lot of your infrastructure is very outdated. If you think of your house, you need to constantly be repairing the roof so that it doesn't create more damage in the future. So this is just investing in infrastructure that has lived its life, is no longer functioning, and becomes very inefficient to have to maintain. So you are, for example, you're spending a lot of time and money maintaining greens that are over 60 years old, when greens have a lifespan of 25 years before they start to lose efficiency. So we've been looking at that as well. So this is one of my design pillars and what I kind of pitched myself as when I was applying for this role, is something that's really important to me is equitability. And that just means one person's experience on the golf course is not more important than anyone else's. So we want to create an interesting, pleasurable, and challenging experience for all types of golfers. And that means it doesn't matter how good or bad you are at golf. We want you to have a fun and challenging experience that suits your game. We don't want to penalize you for being a bad golfer or hitting it not as far as someone else. Equitable design also allows players of varying skill to experience the same golf course. So what that means is if it's a dog leg left from the back tees, we want it to be a dog leg left from all of the tees as well. Or if there's a short par 4 that you're hitting a short iron into the green from the back tees, we want everyone to hit a short iron into the green from whatever tees you're playing. And that kind of goes along with strategic design. Strategic design is essentially allows varying options or routes to get from tee to green. And you kind of choose your own way to get there based on your skill, based on the wind, based on the weather, based on whatever it may be. We give you options. This is an image of St. Andrews, the old course. And what I find most incredible about the old course is that it really does this equitability very well. It challenges the best players in the world. So they'll host the Open Championship, and then the next Monday, the locals will go out and play the exact same golf course. So that's kind of a good example of making something difficult and challenging for the scratch golfer, but also the 25 handicap can go out there and play it as well and have fun. So the second thing that's really important to me as a designer is sustainability. And I talk about that in two different ways. Sustainability of membership. So membership, legacy, retention, and really making sure that the golf course will allow you to play golf as long as you want. So not being able to get in and out of the bunkers is not going to stop you from playing golf, because we're going to fix that. And a reallocation of labor and maintenance input, that's alluding to the efficiency that is lost on the golf course. So if you didn't have to spend 2 hours raking and picking acorns out of a bunker, what could you do with that time elsewhere on the golf course? And finally, I think you have a really special environment here, with the trees, with the access to the water, with the habitat, and it was really important to me to uphold that as much as possible throughout this process, and highlight that, especially the oaks out here, they're such a part of your character. So to highlight that and really elevate that as much as possible. And finally, I think golf should be fun. So a lot of what you'll see in this design is really trying to emphasize fun on the golf course and bringing back that playfulness. And how you make golf fun is you're able to play with different people of different skill levels, and the golf course allows that. Using every club in your bag, that's generally a sign of good design, and creating variety amongst shot types and shot skills is fun. I find losing balls not so fun. So if we can minimize that, you don't have a lot of opportunity to lose balls out here. But for example, penal design is quite known for losing balls. So you have to cross a large body of water without any option to go around it. So we're trying to minimize that, and also at the same time increase pace of play. So we want to create variety out here. You have 9 holes, and we want you to be surprised every time you step on the tee. So variety in length, variety of angle, variety in shot type, variety in technique. Variety just allows you to use your mind game as well as your physical game. And we like you to have to make decisions out on the golf course, because that gives you the opportunity to get creative. Okay, so the first kind of 3 or 4 months of my design process, I'm not even picking up a pen or a pencil. It's just collecting information, collecting data, quantitative data about member demographics from Sean. So I want to know your average age of member. I want to know where they're coming from. What's the split between gender? Jeff was great in providing a lot of the information about what tees get played most often, what the handicaps are, a lot about the sort of the ratings and the slopes and numbers of the golf course. We also look at surface area measurement, and that's just a really easy and quick way to determine where you're lacking in surface area. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we go through each element. But I can imagine you are aware that you have a lot of sand out there, a lot of surface area of sand. So that becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly once you look at the numbers of where we can find that balance. And we also considered Willie Park. He's an exceptional architect, and we wanted to elevate his thought and kind of get into the mind of what would Willie Park do today, and really a nod to his design pillars and what he values on a golf course, and implement that as much as possible in a modern way. And then the fun part for me is the qualitative data collection, where I get to play golf and I get to 5-putt the third green and make note of that. And watch people play golf and watch them struggle to get in and out of the bunkers and having to use a rake and climb out of it and sit on an angle like this, trying to get a shot out of the bunkers. So that's data, that's information that I can collect and consider when redesigning this golf course. And also got a lot of great feedback when I was just walking around the golf course, meeting people, and you've shared your stories with me, so thank you for that. And we also did an infrastructure study. So we looked at the drainage, the irrigation, the bunker liners, the green complexes, and really tried to understand where you're putting too much money, not being efficient with your maintenance regime, and seeing how we can alleviate that. Okay, we're going to go through some numbers. Oh, sorry, it's not that exciting, but they are important. So we like to say that an average green size, depending on length, par, stroke, strategy, should be between 5,160 and 6,450 square feet. That's large enough to spread wear, offer a variety of pin positions, and allow for a reasonably hit shot to reach the green. You can see from the green surface area charts that you do have a lot of greens that don't meet that requirement. And what that does is just causes a lot of extra maintenance to keep them in good playing condition. It doesn't allow for a lot of pin positions, and it makes the hole sometimes quite difficult. If you look at the fourth green, you might be able to feel that that's quite a small green. And it is. If you look at the numbers, this is by far the smallest green on the golf course, which makes that hole quite challenging. So one of the phenomenons that happens quite naturally over time at golf courses, especially old ones like this, is that greens shrink. So if you notice, the green would have been 2 feet away from the sprinkler head when it was built, and now it's 4 or even 6 feet away from the sprinkler head. And that phenomenon is just happens when 6 o'clock in the morning and the guys are out pushing the mowers, and they don't want to scalp the edge of the green, so they err on the side of the interior. And what that does is over time, the greens get smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's very natural, but what we want to do is kind of reinstate those areas that have lost surface area over time. As I mentioned before, greens have generally a 25-year life cycle. After that point, they start to become quite intensive to maintain. They don't function as well. The infrastructure starts to break down, and it becomes a lot of time and money to maintain them and keep them up to the quality and standard of the rest of the greens. And you have a green up there that's 60 years old, so you can imagine how much effort it takes from your superintendent to keep that alive every year. So we look at health and safety quite seriously throughout this process. It's just due diligence on my part to make sure that this typed property is as safe as it can be. You can think about the relationship between 2 green and 3 tees, how tight that is and how golfers interact. As well, the 7th green is a really problematic area for me because it's a blind shot from the tees, and as our equipment has become better and we're stronger, people are driving the green now, and so there's a tension there that needs to be addressed to make sure it's more safe, as well as balls going onto the 5th much too often. So that's going to be addressed in this. And then also playability. So I talked a little bit about how the 3rd green ruined my game. And I think there's opportunity there to make that green better, make it a little bit more fair, more playable as we go through this process. And again, as happens with old clubs, if construction has happened at different times, you create greens that are different ages, different specifications, different makeup of subsoil. And what that does is create 9 different greens that have to be maintained in 9 different ways. So over time, you've essentially created, Scott's calls it his 9 different children that he has to manage every year. So you have some problems in green consistency. And what you might not realize is that for you as a golfer to go out there and experience 9 greens that putt the exact same way, the amount of input and thought and design and money and time that goes into doing that is not efficient nor sustainable. So green surrounds you might not think of as like the most important element of a golf course, but it actually is very influential in your experience of the golf course. They do play a key role in the interest and challenge. And throughout the master plan, you'll see a general tweak of the green surrounds in terms of the grass height. So moving the fairway closer to the greens and pushing the rough back away from the greens. And what that does, and I'll just note, watch some of the golf this weekend because they do it very well at this golf course. And again, it is that great equalizer of when you have shortly mown surrounds, it challenges the best players in the world. But also if you're not super comfortable flopping a 60-degree off a tight lie, you can putt it. You can use a 7-iron, you can use a hybrid. So that inspires shot options and creativity. And that's really what we're trying to do out here. Create interest, variety, excitement. So as it stands now, I think your recovery shot. So what I mean by a recovery shot is if you miss the green, your recovery shot to then get on the green is quite one-dimensional, two-dimensional. You're either in the sand or in the rough. And we would just want to add a 3rd dimension to that so that we ask you to get better at different skills, offer variety, and challenge you in different ways. It might be a little bit counterintuitive to think of it this way as well, but the fairway grass or the bent grass you have, it holds up to traffic much better than the bluegrass or the rough, the high rough. And so you do have a lot of traffic pinch points out around the greens that become compact. And what happens when an area becomes compact is that the turf quality suffers. So you see wear and tear and just inconsistent turf quality. So by adding some more fairway around the greens, we can eliminate a lot of that wear and tear. So this is Pinehurst. This is an image of kind of the of the shortly mown surrounds that I'm talking about. So you'll see the fairway going right up to the edge of the green, with some nice undulations around that. So what that does is really creates, a choose your own adventure. If you're short of the green by 10 feet, you have to decide if you want to putt that, chip that, flop that, hybrid that, whatever you want. And so that creates, variety and interest and challenge and strategy. And as an architect, if I've asked you to make a decision on that hole, if you've had to make a decision, that's a win for me. That's good design. And here again is the old course. I could talk about St. Andrews all day. It's my favorite, but here's the 18th at St. Andrews, and it has that same idea of the short grass going right up to the green. Okay, let's talk about the tees for a little bit. So using some of the data that was collected in the beginning, based on the number of rounds played per year, based on the tees that you play from most frequently, it was determined that the tees should measure 4,500 to 5,000 square feet per hole at minimum. If you look at that total tee on the right, essentially none of your tees meet that. So you have a size discrepancy in all of your tees, and what that does is it basically makes it really hard to maintain good grass. So again, your efficiency is really reduced by not having enough teeing space. So all of your tees could be expanded for sure. And especially if you consider the growing environment of some of your tees on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The growing environment is very poor. So you have trees kind of enclosed around the tee box, and grass competes for the same thing as trees: sunlight, water, nutrients, air. And so when you have trees that kind of contain tees, it becomes really difficult to grow grass. So by expanding the tees, we can allow more recovery time for the grass before the markers are placed in the same area. There's again some health and safety concerns with the location of some of the tees. The third tee, for example, we alluded to that. So any opportunity we can get to enhance the safety of some of these tees, we've taken the opportunity to do that. The 9th, I think we have some things to say about the 9th when we get there. And also we want to, by expanding the tees in all directions, we want to offer variety. So one day you step on the 3rd hole and it's 185 yards. The next day it's 167. We want to surprise you and keep you thinking and guessing when you're out there, and lots of different options and variety, so that depending on the day, the event, the season, you can place the markers in a lot of different ways. What I found quite interesting is if you look at the subtotal of the surface area, the majority of your surface area is on the back tees. And I can tell you from the data collected that the majority of your play is from the middle tees. So we want to just kind of flip those numbers around so that you have more teeing space where you need it, where you actually use it. So what we've proposed throughout this design is what we call free-form tees. And that's just essentially, there really isn't a differentiation between green surrounds, tees, and fairways. They're all cut at the same height. There's no border around the tees. So this is Cabot Cliffs. This is a great example of what I'm describing. You can see this is the whole tee here, this whole area. So you can imagine the options and variety of teeing space, teeing distances that you can kind of play around with there. And here as well on the right side, this is a par 3. There's no defined tee box. It's all kind of one space. And imagine that being your 6th hole, say, where the fairway runs from tee right to green. And there's kind of no specific differentiation between where the tee ends and where the fairway begins. Here's another example. This is Bandon Dunes. Again, so you're finishing off this green here and you're walking onto the tee, and there's no differentiation. There's no rough, there's no cart path to cross to the tee. You're going from green to tee, and the tee runs this whole length. Okay, fairways, this is gonna be really fun because, well, I just think it's really interesting. So the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America, very reputable, by the way, know what they're talking about. They estimate that 16 acres of fairway is required to ensure decent pace of play, player enjoyment, and consistent and desirable playing conditions. Does anyone want to guess how much fairway you have? So you're 16 acres minimum. Well, how much do you have? You have 7.8 acres of fairway. So less than half of what is recommended to ensure decent pace of play, player enjoyment, and desirable playing conditions. So I think that with those numbers, we can assume that if we can expand the fairways, we should do that as much as possible. So this weekend for the PGA, they'll be playing on fairways that are 28 to 32 yards wide at the landing area. Scratch golfers will hit that 32 yard wide fairway 2/3 of the time. 20 handicap golfers require a 40 yard wide fairway to hit the same ratio. Anyone want to take a guess at your landing area widths? 200 yards over the tee? It's 22 yards wide. And I think if you think about the drip line of the trees, probably 15. So you're playing on 22 yard wide fairway landing areas, and these guys this weekend are playing on 28 to 32. So just think about how that affects your game. So we're going to propose a lot of fairway expansion throughout this. Just to note that we want to do that without compromising any of the oaks that are out there, any of the trees that are lining the fairways. So the fairway expansion will be as much as possible without increasing the tree removal. So this is Bandon again, and what I would like to show you here is some of the adjoining fairways. And what that does is it really kind of amplifies the scale of the property. So you can see throughout this area and right across, there's adjoining fairways. And again, because you have kind of restricted corridors from the trees, we're going to implement this adjoining fairway idea to make the scale feel bigger. Okay, I'll give you a second to orientate yourself with this image, and I've done a rendering to show you how it's possible to expand the fairways in this area. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so you can see right away there's a lot more width on the fairways this way, and also kind of an adjoining area around 4, 5, 7. We've also adjoined the surrounds on 5 into the tees on 6. And as I mentioned before, the 6 kind of, you have the tees, fairway, green, all as one height of cut. Let us go back. So trees are all still there. It's just an expansion of fairway. And I'll talk a little bit about scale. You'll know that you have quite large bunkers And from the numbers, you have very small greens, very small tees, and very small fairways. So we want to balance that out as we go through this process. Oops. Okay, we'll move on. So I've talked about the bunkers a little bit, but bunkers are really important to consider during this process because they are the most expensive thing to maintain, to build, to restore, and to maintain on a day-to-day basis. So we want to make sure that if we're proposing to keep or add sand, it's for a very good reason. They often wear out faster than any other part of the golf course. The bunkers were the impetus for this master plan. They are failing. They are in rapid decline. They have problems with drainage, liner, sand consistency, sand buildup. The lips are collapsing. The access is declining. So the bunkers, we knew from the very beginning that the bunkers needed a really intensive overhaul. So that's what we've done throughout this process is looked at each and every individual bunker and try to assess how we could best improve that. There's a pretty intensive maintenance burden with some of these bunkers simply because of surface area, but also because they're underneath oak trees. For example, on the second hole, that bunker on tucked in on the right, it's a pretty intensive maintenance burden to clean that out and make sure it's playable for you. So we thought about that as well. And you'll see some examples of what I call a double hazard. And that means that we can use the same bunker example on two. That means that if there wasn't a bunker there, if there wasn't sand there, would you still be penalized if you landed there? And the answer would be yes, because the trees are blocking you out from any shot at the green. So in that instance, there's not necessarily a valid reason for having sand there because you would be penalized anyway. So being penalized once in sand and twice because you have no shot, that's a double hazard and we can eliminate that. Again, I just want to emphasize that we did our very best to consider upholding, maintaining, preserving the character of the golf course through the natural environment, through the trees. So we considered health and safety, turf health and maintenance, playability and equity, and also creating habitat through indigenous species of trees. So throughout the plan, you'll see also opportunity for plantings and areas to do that safely and strategically that doesn't interfere with the golf. Okay, fun part. Ready? Need a break? Sure. Okay. I need a break. This is my third time doing this presentation, so it's gotten better every time. So you're getting the best of me. Okay, so we'll start off with the practice area. I'll just give you a little bit of legends so you can. I understand these drawings might be hard to comprehend if you haven't been looking at them every day for the last year like I have. You'll have this booklet to look over on your own time within a few days. But the white lines that you see, the solid white lines, that's proposed. So that's what we've proposed in the plan. The dotted lines are what is existing. So this is your existing green, existing fairway. And then the dashed lines are just the center lines of the hole. These are proposed new plantings. These tree icons. And then these are proposed sort of mounding that I'll walk you through. So I'll go through each hole. I'll tell you a little bit about the issues that came up with the hole and the solutions that we propose to address that. So there's definitely a safety concern with the practice area along here between the first and the practice. Balls coming over from the first hole. So we'd like to address that with some new plantings, some mounding to just create a little bit more of a barrier in between the first hole and the practice area to make sure it's as safe as possible. Also the concern of the practice area is that if you have one person using it, it's hard to add a second person in a safe way without being at risk of getting hit from behind. So the solution to that is we've proposed adding a second green. So we've added a second green over here by the fifth tees. So that would allow you to play from both directions and spread out the traffic a little bit as well. I found that the practice area doesn't really replicate anything that's on the existing golf course. So the point of a practice area is to practice your shots that you will experience out on the golf course, and it doesn't really do that. So if we can redesign the practice area that is a little bit more reflective of situations that you might encounter on the golf course, that would be to your benefit. And also it's just a bit one-dimensional of the shots out there of what you can do now. And so we want to create a lot more different lies, fairway, rough, different angles, different lengths. You have an uphill lie, downhill lie, so really implementing a lot of different movement in the practice area as well. Okay, here's your first hole. I'll just touch on the practice green, which is here, briefly before we move on. Again, with this practice green, it doesn't really reflect the greens that you have on the golf course. It has maybe 10 to 20% flat area, and that really should be flipped. It should have 80% flat area so that you can determine the green speeds of the golf course before you go out and play. So I think an expansion of the practice green, the practice putting green, and a recontouring of it to flatten it out would be beneficial. So that's what we proposed. Issues again with this first hole, the safety margin on this left side. So you'll see some new plantings, some contouring, and some new plantings up here by the practice green. The first hole has a few maintenance issues. Firstly, on the tees, there's not enough teeing space, so we've expanded the tees in all directions as much as possible to alleviate that maintenance burden, to spread wear, spread traffic, and also increase variety. We've expanded the fairways on both sides a little bit, and also the fairway comes back toward the tees here. And as you saw in that rendering before, a lot more shortcut grass around the greens, so the surrounds are in fairway rather than rough. And one of the main concerns I sort of watched when I was out here observing is that the first hole plays quite easy for people who can take out driver and blast it toward the green over top of those trees. There's really no penalty for going left. So you can end up 40 yards left over here and have because your superintendent is so good at his job, a perfectly lush lie in the rough, 40-yard chip shot onto the green, boom, birdie. So we've considered that, and we want to penalize people for going left, for going that far left. And what that does is encourage people to stay away from the practice area on their drives, and also consider not taking the driver off the hole, perhaps laying up. Okay, we'll move on to the second hole. Tees here on the left, around the corner to the green. So we have some safety issues on this hole, especially in relation to the housing. So a way to, an architectural tool to really alleviate that instantly is to lower the tees. And what lowering the tees does, if you lower the tees by 2 meters, your netting and your trees immediately become 2 meters higher. So that's one tactic that we've done here to just increase the safety margin. We've also increased the size of the tees drastically. So there's a lot more teeing space here. There's a connection between the green and the tees, so you're no longer crossing the cart path. The cart path is moved. As much as you might not realize it, it's nice if you're walking not to have to walk across cart paths. So just shifting the cart path a little bit will hopefully enhance your experience. We've removed the bunker and the trees there for reasons that I spoke about earlier, being a double hazard. So if you land here, you're penalized enough. In my opinion, you don't have to be in sand as well. And we're also eliminating that maintenance burden for maintaining a massive bunker that has leaf litter and acorns and grass in it all the time. We've added we've sort of pulled this bunker back. It is here. We've pulled it back about 20 yards. That will act as more of a target. It's an alignment bunker, and it will also stop you from going too far through the hole. To address the safety issue with the third tees, we've shifted the green slightly left by 2 or 3 meters. So, and we've removed the bunkers on the left. So that's going to reorientate the center, the target, away from the tees. And we've implemented some shortcut surrounds around the green. And the bunker here has been pulled back a little bit to intercept balls that are traveling toward the third tees, as well as open up this heavy traffic area here. I've done a rendering, so I'll just, you'll see it on the next hole. It'll be a little bit more clear about the area from green to tee. So this is your third hole, the green we talked about a little bit before. This is your largest green on the golf course, by far, your largest green, and it has 3 pin positions. We would like to say greens should have between 9 and 12 pin positions. So if you think about the size of the green and the amount of pin positions you have and the difficulty of it is just really poor design, and we can make it better. So we have proposed to rebuild this green completely. And while we're rebuilding the green, it would be to the benefit of the boundary to shift it left a little bit away from that boundary line. So the angle of the hole shifts left a little bit to increase that safety margin, and just a reorientation of the bunkering so that miss is left. So there's no bunkers on the left of the green. That's kind of just fairway cut height. So here's a photo standing behind the third tees. Just orientate yourself a bit. You'll see when I go to the next slide, you'll see that this bunker has been eliminated. There's a new bunker in the foreground here. And I'd also like you to notice the green surrounds in this area of what I'm talking about with shortcut surrounds and what that will actually look like in terms of contouring. And then you'll see in the distance the new bunkering scheme of the green, and the green shifted left. So new bunker in the foreground to intercept those balls. This is the sort of green surrounds that I'd like to see out here in the future. And then if you just take a look at the green positioning, you'll see it shift left. And there's a proposed forward tee on this hole, on the third hole. so that the carry of that left bunker is only around 65 yards. Just to increase the playability of that hole. Okay, fourth hole, this is a great hole, if you hit it long. The stroke index equality here is pretty apparent. It's 8 for the men and 2 for the women. So what that means is that it's the second easiest hole for the men and fourth easiest.
It's fourth most difficult.
Fourth most.
It used to be the most difficult, got related.
Yes, so what I'm trying to say is that it's very difficult for the higher handicaps. That's based on the carry off the tee, the length of the hole, the access to the green, the size of the green. So we want to just create a little bit more balance here. So how we've done that is we've proposed to bring the fairway back toward the tees a little bit, so that when you're driving from the tees, you don't hit it right into the rough and it gets stuck on that hill there. And it's a good example of how we're doing these small tweaks to make it a little bit more enjoyable for the higher handicaps without affecting the scratch golfers, because the scratch golfers are not looking at the beginning of the fairway coming back toward the tees. They're looking way down. So it doesn't really affect their game. It's not making it easier for the scratch golfers. This has a 20-yard wide landing area. We'd like to expand that a little bit as much as possible. This is where the fairways start to adjoin with the fifth hole. The bunkers are in a pretty good location on this hole. It's quite a strategic hole. So what we've done is we've kept the location of the bunkers, but we've just reduced the sand footprint, reduced the maintenance burden of this hole. And I find it interesting, considering the amount of sand you have, which is an incredibly high amount, you don't really see a lot of it from the tees or from the fairways until you really get up close. So I think we can do a better job of using less sand, but making it more visible. Fifth hole, another really good hole. This fairway is only 18 yards wide, so y'all are good, or I don't know. Yeah. I stand on this 15. I just like, should I just hit 7-iron? I'm terrified of it. So this is a good example of a bunker being a double hazard. So if you think about that right bunker off the tee, if there wasn't sand there, would you still be penalized? Would you still have to chip out essentially? And the answer is yes. So we're going to take that opportunity to remove that bunker entirely, turn it into fairway. But if you land there, you're still going to be penalized, just in a different way. There's a pretty intensive traffic pinch point at the green on the left side where every single person walks. And what that does is really compacts the ground and it makes it very difficult to grow grass. And it also, you know, it affects the ball when the ground is compact in specific areas. And plays different from other areas. So if you happen to land on that area where it's really compact, your ball's going to take off in a different way than you would expect it to. So we propose to remove that bunker on the left and create sort of a grassy hollow, a grassy bunker, if you will, in the short one fairway height. Okay, another little rendering here of the fifth. And this is if the bunker on the left is gone, you'll notice a widening of the fairway of the approach. And the bunker on the right is probably about half the amount of sand, but you see much more of it. You'll also notice in the rendering, how the shortcut, the fairway goes on behind the green and leads up into the 6 tees. So now, rather than just having rough or sand on your recovery shots on this hole or on your second shot, you might be on a shortcut fairway lie on the left, you might be in the sand or you might be in the rough. So there's just different ways to strategize about playing this hole now. Okay, here's the 6th hole. Just what I was alluding to earlier, this sort of extension of fairway into tees here. We've pushed the cart path over to the right side. So again, if we can eliminate any crossovers of cart path, we like to do that. It kind of gets it out of the way, removes the visual, it just makes the 6th hole a little bit nicer. I find there's an equity imbalance on this hole as well, because if you have to rely on the ground game to get to the green, this hole's really, really challenging because of the shape of the fairway. Everything is kind of kicking the ball left and ending up in that really penal deep bunker just here. So we proposed here to expand the green entrance a little bit and shift the bunker farther to the left, so that if you do have to run the ball into the green, you have a chance at getting it on the green now. We've removed a little bit of the sand on the right again because it creates a traffic pinch point. I watched a lot of golf out here and I never saw anyone in this back bunker here. Well, it's gone now. Again, so creating that fluid nature from tee to green, you have fairway, fairway, and also again from green to tee is another connection in fairway. We propose to drop the elevation of these tees again, for the same reason as we did on the second, to increase the height of the margin between the road and the 6th hole. So by dropping these tees 2 meters, the trees just grew 2 meters instantly. I'd love to see these 4th tees and 6th tees connected. Just kind of creating that interaction between holes, expanding the scale of that area that feels quite cramped as it is, and offering a little bit extra yardage, a little bit of extra variety on both of those holes. The 7th hole to me is where the routing kind of breaks down a little bit. I find it to be your weakest hole in the golf course, this kind of 7-8 corner. That's because there's an equity imbalance where this hole really sets up for someone to drive it left into the 5th fairway and have the best angle into the green from the 5th. That's not really good design. It's not safe. And it's not the way that we want to encourage people to play the hole. It's also blind from the tee, so it creates another safety issue with pace of play and waiting for players to clear, not being able to see, and then hitting when people are still on the green. So we've addressed this by essentially straightening up the dog leg a little bit. You're adding sort of 40 yards to this hole. I'm very aware that this is a Willey Park location of green. And I think I know Willey Park's design philosophies well enough that if he were to come here today, he would agree that that's probably not the place for the green anymore in today's modern golfing experience, because people are hitting it farther and the dispersion is wider. So we've really challenged people on this hole not to go left onto the 5th. There's great penalty to do that in this design. The green does not set up to receive a ball from that side. There are bunkers on the left. There's going to be trees in the way on the left. So really encouraging people to drive it up the right-hand side of the hole will be the strategy going forward. So so this is where the green is now. And we've shifted it over to where the 8th tees are. So this is the proposed green location. This is the 8th tee currently. Existing, proposed. Sorry, I'll just go back to this image here. You can see the shift in this photo. Just watch the 7th green here in this area. This is where it is now. And it shifts over here to where the 8th tees are. Okay, onward. I'm happy to go back to any of these holes during the Q&A session.
Is that like a do-over for you?
Pardon?
Is that like a do-over for you?
What's that?
I'm just going back.
Hey,
We got it.
So if the 7th green were to shift as proposed, there would be a knock-on effect to the 8th tees. So essentially they would flip over on themselves to the left. So here's where they are now. And it would just be a slight shift to the left. So slight dog, the dog leg becomes slightly less. Eric and I were out there yesterday and it's 4 trees that have to come down in that corner. So it looks like a lot, it's not, it's 4, and we would propose to replant in the area of the 7th green and here as well. So we would replant at whatever we take down, we would plant at least, if not more. There's proposed more in this instance. So reducing the dog leg of this hole makes it a little bit safer, a little bit more playable, increases the pace of play, opens up the visual of the hole a little bit more. So next time you're out there playing that hole, stand to the left of the 8 tees and see what it looks like from that angle. We propose to remove the bunker that's just here in the fairway, again, for that double hazard reasoning. If you're in that bunker, you don't have a shot at the green. So there's not really any necessity for sand to be there because you'll be penalized anyway. And that bunker generally only penalizes, the 150-yard drive, and that's not who we want to be making it difficult for. We've realigned the bunkers down at the green. These bunkers become alignment bunkers. There's a target there for you now, and there's also something to stop you going through to the 9th hole. So just increasing that safety margin between the 8th and the 9th as well. Okay, here's your 9th hole. The biggest concern here for me is that the forward tee complex in this area. It's just so tight, it's so congested. People are crossing from 8 to back tees on 9, having to hit from the drop zones, and people don't know where to stand. So it really is just a problem area, in my opinion. This proposal has eliminated the forward tee entirely. A new tee forward and keeping that sort of the back tee element, so the drop zone would remain there. That would allow us to remove as much as the fence as possible. I'm not partial to a black chain link fence on a property like this. It doesn't really suit. So if we can eliminate that fence and increase the safety, that would be ideal. This hole is really challenging for anyone playing from that forward tee location, just because of the way that the fairway is aligned. The fairway is aligned only for those playing from this back tee area. If you're playing from this area, your tee shot is forced right toward the wood. And if you take a direct line, your ball gets caught up in the rough. So just expanding the fairway in strategic ways to make it a little bit more playable for people playing the forward tees. We really wanted to address this green complex. There's some maintenance issues in that valley leading up to the green where there's an excessive amount of divots, the grass is in good quality. And also access to the green, if you bump in one way, if you have to use the ground to get to the green is really, really challenging. So we've widened that approach and we've also elevated that valley to get a little bit more flat area in that space. Okay, here's your last rendering. I'm really partial to this one. I think it's quite stunning. This is your finishing 9th hole. So you'll notice the expansion of fairway across this area. This is your sort of low valley point. This is only this wide, and now it's going to be doubled, if not more, and also elevated. Entrance to the green is widened. And also, you can see a little bit more of the green surface by altering the surrounds. I'll go back and just can take note of that. So this is a pretty realistic vision of how your golf course will look at the end of this. The bunkers will be pretty clean, the rough will be green, the fairway will be green. It's not too dissimilar from what you have now. It's just a redistribution of sand and fairway lines, not visual. Okay, so here's the proposed scorecard. We've managed to add 78 yards to the back tee. The golf course will never be long enough to challenge the best golfers, but we've considered that. We've tried to, in fact, increase the challenge of this golf course and the difficulty of this golf course for scratch golfers and good golfers and long hitters. The blue tees get a little bit longer, 49 yards. Reds essentially don't change. And the silvers are 54 yards shorter, and that was intentional. If you think again about the 4th hole, we want to give a forward tee option on holes like 4, just to make it a little bit more enjoyable. So next steps, this is still a draft. I'm going to be working on this for the foreseeable future. So we'd love to hear any feedback from you, how you feel comfortable doing that. Once we get enough feedback from yesterday's session, today's session, we'll be able to put together a final draft. And once we have that final draft, we can then go and get it costed and see how much this is going to cost. And then once we know how much it's going to cost, then we can determine the schedule and execution of how we're going to go about doing that. So yeah, thank you so much. I would welcome any questions you might have. Hi, John.
Hello. Thank you very much for your time and having these presentations. I think clarifies a lot of things. One of the things that we're talking about is widening the fairways. And with that and throughout the demonstration, their presentation, there's been things about safety. Being a smaller city, of course, understandable. But do you think widening those fairways will create, because I think whether you widen them or not, people are still going to end up in other fairways. Are we promoting a safety issue, widening the fairways between 4 and 5? Not. And then the other concern in regards to the safety question is that tee box between the 7th green and the 8th tee box. Is there going to be some type of natural kind of barrier between the two, or are we going to leave it open? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't envision expanding fairways contributing to a different or worse safety element. That's not really what the data shows when it's been done in the past. And in regards to the 7th and 8th area, So you're talking here, so green would be here and tees would be right behind. Yeah, so that's. It's generally considered pretty safe, if you recall that. The Chambers Bay image. Go back. If you can put the tees. Beyond the green and use contouring. To intercept balls, sorry. Yeah, so here's this cabot image. So green is here, leads right into the tees. So there's strategic contouring here in between to intercept balls. And it's a pretty kind of common design feature that there's usually not an excess of safety issues.
Also want to point out. Can you go to that over ahead with the fairways, continual fairways?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So we're not changing the corridors of the course at all. The trees are still there. Right now, John, let's say you hit, you hit one right about there. You're in the rough, you're under the tree. Now you're on shorter grass. Possibly. You still have to deal with the trees. It's not that the ball is going to speed up and zip through, but definitely you're still going to be penalized based on the corridors that are naturally a part of the course.
Hi, yes.
Christine, most people hate our bunkers, put it mildly. Is part of your redesign. Tell me you're gonna eliminate the fingers, would you please?
Done.
Perfect.
You got it.
Yeah,
Yes, that
yeah.
we definitely propose to rethink the bunkers completely, remove a lot of those intricacies that cause playability issues, cause maintenance issues. So they will be a lot more simple. Even if you look at this rendering here, you can see they're just very simplified versions of what you have. So that's kind of what you have now with all your lovely fingers.
Music to my ears, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not a super fan of your bunkers either.
Also, just want to point out that I think it was within the last 2 weeks, we had a member that was in the fourth fairway bunker, fell and could not get out. I mean, there's some definite safety concerns with that as our membership ages. And what can we do to make sure that, you know, again, this game is fun. Let's make sure it stays fun.
Yeah, I don't think we've broken the leg yet, have we?
It's coming.
Yeah, it's done.
Yeah,
How this changed the rating of the course as somebody who, just in the last week played 9, put in 7 pointers on 9. You've taken most of them away. So that would certainly change my game that big as it, how would it change the variability?
yeah, I don't know exactly. It will change, definitely, but I'd like to emphasize that making fairways wider, opening approaches to greens doesn't make this easier. This will not become an easier golf course for most of you. It will actually become more complex, which is the point. It will become easier for the slower swing speeds for the higher handicap, which is intentional. And the data doesn't support that this will become easier. It shows the opposite. And so I think the slope and the rating will reflect that over time.
Just to add as well, Phil, that if you look at what Christine has done with the amount of surface of the sand has reduced drastically, but strategically, the bunkers are doing the exact same thing. So on one, she's eliminated this massive bunker with 2 smaller bunkers, and it is basically doing the same thing in terms of being penal. Same with number 4, where we have 5 around the surrounds. We're now at 3, and strategically they are in the same place. So as a golfer, as you're determining your shot, you're still thinking the same way. Am I aiming to this point or to that?
We've got a couple more questions, well, many more, so a couple more on the right there.
Thank you very much. I thought that was absolutely fantastic, and it's clear from all the chatter I've heard that you've reflected it back into the design. Recognizing this is a years-long, potentially years-long initiative, Is there anything that can be done to incorporate some of the recommendations into the course now? My favorite example being, there's no fairway to speak on
On
the
nine.
9. So what can we do to, let's say, do the grooming now of the course to get closer to where you want to go without the restructuring?
So very good question. When we talk about short grass. For example, if we were gonna realign number 9 or put short grass, it's not as simple as just. Mowing the bluegrass lower, it's actually a change in species, so there's some work to be done now. How this is phased, and I'll just speak to that right now, and perhaps this may address a few other questions as well. That's really long-term up to us to decide. If we decide to take on little chunks of this annually over 5 years first, the cost will escalate because there's mobilization, all those things. Another option might be to say, okay, we're gonna close in September of 1 year, we're gonna work through the fall and early winter, and then be open the following June. Like, there's many different ways to do this, we haven't gotten that far. All of that will impact costs. Obviously, the more you piecemeal this year after year, the cost will escalate because there's remobilization, there's increasing costs, there's some disruption to play either way. So hopefully that helps.
Well, I was just going to say that there are a lot of similarities between what you're proposing here and Mid-Pines and Carolina. Those of us who have had the fortune to go down and play there, it's down the Ross course. There's a lot of elements in your design that remind me very much of that. And it's a fantastic design. One comment on number 7 is that originally number 7, maybe, well, those of us who have been here, I've been here 23 years, but the green was on the left-hand side of number 7. And it was a very simple, easy hole. What happened to number 7 by pushing it right made it that much more difficult and challenging to play. I think, actually, personally, I think it was a great improvement to me. So I just bear that in mind as you're design the course. I love the concepts and that. Just on 7, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And that's still a process for me. That area is definitely not finalized. So I'd love your feedback on that. So thank you. Yes.
The change you're making on number 2 by lowering the tee box, and I think you're straightening out a little bit.
A little.
But several years ago, I was actually hitting the back of the head with a ball with somebody who went right over the top and to the green and hit me in the back of the head. So is that going to, you think that will eliminate any possibility of somebody going to the green? Or just it will now be more visible that they could see?
It's so hard to say it will eliminate it altogether because golfers are erratic and
Yeah.
we have best intentions and it doesn't always work out that way. But we're going to do everything we can to reduce that possibility.
The other thing I would say, I think a lot of what you proposed is really, really good. I think it's very exciting. So I think you've done a great job.
Thank you.
Were you hit on the head standing on the second tee?
No, I was on the green. I was on the second green. And somebody went for the green, and I think I know who it was, but I never got an apology. That doesn't matter. But I got hit in the back of the head.
You just don't remember.
So that was it.
Yes, hi.
Hi, talking about number 2, I was disappointed to hear that you're going to lower that. Because as somebody who plays from the red tees, as an 18-hole or not a good golfer, like the number 2 tees are much easier for me to get onto a fairway than the number 5 reds. It's a long amount of rough down 5, and now it's going to be harder for me to get out there on number 2.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I'd also like to just say to that, we're gonna bring the fairway back for you and bring the tees forward. So although although your tee is a little bit elevated here on the screen, it's now has the opportunity to go forward a little bit. And I think the elevation loss on the second hole is mostly the black tees. It kind of, the tees get lower as you go down. So I don't think we would be changing the elevation of the forward tees very much. It would be more drastically on the back tee. I promise I'm not making this harder for you.
Thank you. No, but I like it.
Okay, good, good.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm excited about it. Getting back to 7, sorry. I think one of the reasons as well why people aim left is because of the sharp camber to the right. On that
Absolutely,
fairway.
yeah.
I assume
Yeah.
that's gonna be.
I'd love to use some of that dirt elsewhere and get in that fairway and change it, definitely, because, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, a lot of people aim left because if you can hit the ball 200, 225, 240, 250, it's a much easier hole. You now have that whole length of the green to attack, where if you're in the fairway shorter hitter, you're landing on a very small, tight area. And so you're either going over, you're going in the bunker, or you're dropping it in the valley.
And something on the middle of the fairway there ends up underneath the trees on the right, at the corner.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yes,
Christine, first of all, thank you. It's very well presented. You can understand that. A couple of things. First, so that we don't have a problem with an ongoing fight for years with the TRCA and the city of Toronto, we considered the 3-to-1 tree replacement ratio.
yeah, absolutely, which
So
is,
we're okay on that.
yeah, we're good on that one. We've identified places to replant. And every tree that we've marked to take down, which as it stands now is 20 trees. We'll be replacing those as we're meant to, 3-to-1.
Yeah, that'll be part of the permit process.
Definitely, yeah.
Going back to number 7, that would be very costly to change 7 and 8, probably one of the most costly components of the change. And I don't think the positioning of the green is the worst thing. I would, and I do have a concern that if we overhit 7, they're gonna be on the green on 8, and 8's gonna be a target. And we're gonna end up with a chain link fence again between the two. So I think there's a way to leave 7, change the bunker in front of 7 and the elevation so it's more approachable from the right-hand side. And re-landscape or change the sand trap to penalize those that want to go long left. And it would save a lot of cost. We wouldn't have to change the TRA.
So you're saying leave the green as is on 7?
I would make it deeper because it's very shallow right now, and because of where the bunker is, you've really got to play a long wedge or a high shot.
Yeah.
Hold it onto the green and it runs off the back. So
Yeah.
I think there's ways to leave it. Similar to where it is now on location, but improve the play.
Yeah.
Probably the most important question is you're trying to make this more playable for the membership as they go to get older.
Yes.
You've eliminated the washroom on between 3 and 5, where you're gonna put.
Go for it.
To your question about the cost. Cost to redo a bunker is going to be there. The cost to redo a green is going to be there. And if we take the approach where we're only going to do some of the greens, we're still going to have the future headaches and maintenance problems that Scott lives every single year. As members, we expect the course to be playing as great as possible. Going through this process and hearing what Scott goes through with his team, it's incredible what has to happen on 9 different levels. And so really, if you're going to do a bunker, you're going to end up touching a green just because of the construction that happens around that. So is there an opportunity to make a hole better? 7 and 8 is where this course does fall apart. Yes, we love certain things about each hole, but can we make it a little bit better? Can we make the course a little bit more interesting from the back tees as well as front tees? So that was the impetus.
Just one comment on 7. If we remove ourselves from that hole itself, we've got 6 par 4s on this golf course. 5 of them today are left to right. So if you believe in variety, then unfortunately, we can't really change 8 from the left to right nature of it, but 7 is one where we can get a little bit more balance, big picture.
Just love to add to that, Patrick. Number 4 is a great hole because it technically forces you to play a draw and a fade. With number 7, you're now being asked to play a fade and a draw to come in. And again, from an interest standpoint, not everybody can do that, but from a strategic level, it's a pretty interesting hole.
And the washroom answer is?
Washers will be out there, definitely. I will make sure of that. Absolutely. Okay.
When it comes to the greens and replacing the greens, are they gonna be sodded or seeded, or what's the time frame that a normal, whichever choice is gonna be, take to be playable?
Scott, I never want to steal your thunder here, but I know ours good.
Yeah, well, they'd be seated for sure. As long as you still have me employed, they'd be seated. But that's the best way to go long term, you know, and, you know, big picture, if we went, everybody agreed to everything here, we would close sometime middle August to the end of August on one season. Then open again, weather depending, as soon as possible. So you're technically, if we did everything on here, you would only be closed for half of season, 2 years in a row. And if that was the case, we'd go to our good buddy Jeff Long to set up receptacles with other courses to make it fun and interesting and keep everybody still golfing.
And we could also offer some temporary greens and still keep the idea of play happy.
Ooh.
That's why we don't give you money.
Politician, can't do that.
I'll add to Scott's answer. People think that sodding's quicker, it may be for a fairway or tee, but an agreement's not. So by the time you get that sod playable, top dress, smooth, and you get a much better product seating, you know, having built a couple golf courses as well. People think that sodding greens is quicker, it's not, and you actually get a much better product as well. And
So just a question to ask you, sort of to repeat what you started at the end, when we get to the point of the work being done, to Scott's point, what do you think the impact is going to be in terms of closing the course? And I guess there's a lot of rumors out there, whether they're accurate or not, there's still that kind of information. We want to make sure that we get a more accurate spin on it. I know you don't know the final plan.
yeah, the notion of closing for an entire season, I think that, you know, at this point, that would not be the intent, you know, unless something drastically changes, but that would not be the intent. I would suggest if there was a closure, it would likely be what Scott would want, so kind of, you know, the end of one season to the beginning of the next. You know, we may also choose, again, it'll come down to probably costs or the appetite of the membership to do a certain amount every year. Again, you're kind of stretching out the impact over 4 to 5 years, you know, then you say, is it just more beneficial to, you know, do it?
Would agree with that, people saying I got the last 2 or 3 years of my best golf. I think you're better to do it all at once. And get that pain through in 6 or 8 months rather than 3 or 4 years of.
Yeah, most clubs go there, by the way, they kind of think through it, think, oh gosh, we're gonna be dealing with construction for 5 years.
Just do it, you know.
Unless you're in the category that's your last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, but then if it's 6 or 8 months, you're not
Yeah.
doing 3 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And really, those are when we're looking for final approval from the membership. Those answers we will have, execution and cost, but not yet.
Are there any parts of, we don't golf on the bluffs, obviously, but there is the environmental issues that are happening with the bluffs. That work, I have no idea what the extent of that is. Are you thinking about that while you're thinking about the when we can do what we can do here?
Yeah, there's a lot of considerations and we're, two things really have to come into focus. One is the cost of this plan, which, you know, we're going down that road, and also the cost of the loss remediation work, and we're well down that road as well. We had a meeting with the TRCA last week to identify the preferred method of remediating data protection. So those things are gonna come into focus in the next couple of months as far as what those costs look like. In addition to that, we're layering it into kind of a 30-year capital plan. So we're gonna have a very detailed outlook on capital spending, including the bluffs, including the golf club or the golf course, including clubhouse requirements over the next 30 years. So it's basically a long-range capital plan for the club. It includes even replacement equipment for Scott. So that will really come into focus over the next, you know, my guess is by the end of summer. And, you know, we also look at our capital funding models for membership sales and, you know, the $25 a month fee that we pay. So all of that will come into focus, and for sure we need the big picture of everything. And the good news is, I mean, we've taken that steps to kind of forecast for 30 years, which will include, you know, golf course, which is one of our biggest assets.
We also have to be mindful as we go through this process of the cost of not doing anything as well. The maintenance costs continue to rise. The amount of time that Scott and his team spend on the bunker, spend on each of them, those costs continue to go up as well. So as we're going through our next level of due diligence, we're going to be looking at that piece as well. And the course, it's the #1 in Canada, 35 in the world. We want to keep that, but more importantly, we want to make the experience for each and every member the best it can possibly be. And to do that over the next 20 years that this plan is in place. And that's, you know, that has been our driving force for the development of this plan.
Final questions? Okay, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
One second.
Yeah.